Welcome everybody to the First Link Learning Series, First Steps, an overview of the dementia journey for care partners. My name is Leslie Latchford and I am a First Link Care Navigator and Support Counselor with the Alzheimer's Society. This session is one of 4 modules, so please look for the other 3 weeks in the series. In this module, we will look at the changes in the brain, adapting to brain changes, and maximizing brain health. Please have a pen and paper handy for both the self-reflection sections of this presentation, as well as to write down any questions that may arise for you throughout. Questions can be addressed by contacting your social worker at the Alzheimer's Society or by joining us at one of our monthly caregiver support group meetings. Keep in mind that this webinar isn't intended to replace the First Link Learning Series sessions that are offered in person at the Alzheimer's Society. Please consider registering for our in-person sessions when they again become available. Also note that this education presentation is for your knowledge building. As everyone's situation is unique, the information provided in this presentation is for educational purposes only and not specific advice for your situation. Please visit our website at www.alzheimerlondon.ca for a staff list, as well as for information on upcoming support groups and other education webinars which may be of interest. Thank you. So in Module 1, we looked at what is dementia. We talked about symptoms, diagnosis, and treatment. Module 2, today we're going to talk about and look at adapting to brain changes. In Module 3, we're going to look at planning ahead. And in Module 4, we're going to look at building a circle of support. We're also going to talk about risks and caregiver stress. So in this module, we're going to again look at changes in the brain, adapting to brain changes, and maximizing brain health. So again, just to start off with some self-reflection and looking at what has changed. And in Module 1, I had you think about some of the changes, the early changes that you've noticed in your loved one and what some of those symptoms were for that individual that maybe prompted you to call the Alzheimer's Society or seek out further assessment from the doctor. So important to keep in mind that all of these changes that you have observed and that the person is experiencing are due to changes in the brain that are a result of the disease process. Important to understand why. So our brain is made up of many different parts, each responsible for key functions. When parts of the brain are not working properly, there will be changes in abilities that they are responsible for. Each person will experience different symptoms based on what parts of their brain is impacted and what type of dementia they have. So we distinguish between various types of dementia in Module 1, and we talked about what differentiates each type from one another. So depending on which type of dementia the person is experiencing will depend on the symptoms that we notice in the individual. So the symptoms that your loved one is experiencing are caused by changes in the brain, and they're not their fault. They cannot compensate for these changes and for the losses that they're experiencing as a result. So understanding this can help you to accept changes and learn how to adapt. Important to remember that although each type of dementia presents with similar symptoms and characteristics, we always say that when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So everybody is going to experience this disease somewhat differently, although there is a predictable path and they will travel along a journey, a progressive journey. Each individual will experience their disease differently. And that is why we always say when you've met one person with dementia, you've met one person with dementia. So we're going to move into a video. This video is about 20 minutes long. This is Module 4 or Part 4 of the Alzheimer's journey. This is the link between brain and behavior. So the link is here for you. It's housed on the Alzheimer's Society of Canada website. There are 3 other videos, 3 other modules. So they are also linked at the same, they're also housed at the same link. So if you are interested in watching video 1, 2, and 3, then you will be able to access those through this link, as well as if you'd like to rewatch module 4, the one that I'm going to show you now, the link between brain and behavior. So give me a moment here. I'm going to prep this video for you.
Someone close to you has been diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. While you're dealing with the impact of this diagnosis, it's important to know that you're not alone. Hello, I'm Susan Ormiston, and my mother died from Alzheimer's disease. 1 in 20 Canadians over the age of 65 is affected by Alzheimer's disease, and many resources exist to help you understand the changes that will occur in the coming years. The Alzheimer's Journey is a video and workbook series on Alzheimer's disease. The first 3 modules for family caregivers follow the 3 stages of the disease. This 4th module is directed to the person with the disease, as well as caregivers. In this program, we take a look at how Alzheimer's disease affects the brain itself, which parts of the brain control our actions and thought processes, and how the death of brain cells may lead to changes in a person's behavior. By understanding what's happening in the brain, you can make better sense of the symptoms of Alzheimer's disease, and you'll find more information on managing changes in the companion booklet to this video. Alzheimer's disease is progressive, which means it will get worse over time. Currently, its cause is unknown, and while there is no cure, there are treatments available to help with some of the symptoms. In understanding the disease, it's important to know that changes in behavior can be related to specific physical changes in the brain. And while individuals with Alzheimer's disease can experience a variety of symptoms, the disease often follows a predictable path. A great deal has been learned about Alzheimer's disease in recent years. The general view is that as researchers are learning more about the brain and its chemistry, medical science is on the brink of exciting developments in both the diagnosis of the disease and its treatment. The human brain is made up of several connected but distinct parts, and within these is a vast communication network linking billions of interconnected nerve cells called neurons. The neurons communicate through an array of impulses traveling a complex network. To understand the effect Alzheimer's disease has on brain function, it's useful to understand how the brain processes information.
The brain acts like the body's control center for actions and reactions to stimuli in our environment. Simply put, it works like this. One nerve cell sends electrical impulses along an axon to the next nerve cell. There's a minute space between the cells called a synapse. Molecules are released at the nerve endings and cross this space to attach to receptors on the neighboring neuron. This can start a new impulse down the neuron. That's describing the process in basic terms. But this is essentially how the brain's messages are relayed. Let me give you a simple example from daily life that shows how functions controlled by different parts of the brain work together. First, you have a thought. I feel like having a cup of coffee. So, now, a whole series of activities have to happen in different parts of your brain in order for you to enjoy that cup of coffee. The brain has to switch on your motor to make you get up out of the chair and into the kitchen. It has to remember where the coffee is stored in the cupboard. You have to recognize what the coffee container looks like and understand that the label has a connection to the contents. You have to recall and understand an entire sequence of actions for making coffee. Open the container, locate the measuring spoon and filter, measure the coffee and put the grounds into the filter. You have to know that the filter goes into the basket and how to do that, and that the basket has to be placed in the coffee maker in a certain way. Now you need water. The brain has to connect the visual image of the tap with the activity of running water. You have to know that the right amount of water has to be measured and how to pour it into the machine. The machine has to be switched on, and you have to exercise patience to wait for the machine to brew, recognize when the procedure is finished, and that the finished coffee has to be poured into the cup or thermos, and the machine switched off. Your brain has to remind you to put in milk and sugar, if that's your preference, and then tell you to raise the cup up to your mouth in order to drink. The part of your brain that controls the reflex action of swallowing has to be functioning correctly. And there you have your cup of coffee to enjoy. So you see what a complicated series of functions the brain has to undertake in order to turn even a simple idea into a completed action. Alzheimer's disease affects not only the individual's ability to initiate and follow a process like this, but also the ability to recognize that a process is required. There are a number of theories as to what causes changes in how the brain works and which of these changes lead to or cause Alzheimer's disease. What we do know is that a breakdown in any part of the brain's processes interferes with its ability to function effectively. Two abnormal structures in the brain that are accepted as indicators of Alzheimer's disease are amyloid plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. Amyloid plaques are dense protein deposits that form outside and around nerve cells in the brain. Whether they are a cause or a byproduct of Alzheimer's disease is not yet known, but they are now thought to cause damage to nearby nerve cells. Inside the affected nerve cells are twisted strands of fibrils called neurofibrillary tangles. These tangles appear to destroy the cell's internal structure. As cells are damaged by Alzheimer's disease, the functions controlled by the affected parts of the brain, such as memory, language, problem-solving, and so on, become impaired or lost altogether. The nerve cells stop working, lose their ability to communicate with other nerve cells, and they die. And as the nerve cells die, the brain shrinks in size and weight.
We can understand how the brain functions if we look at the different parts of the brain. The frontal lobes, here at the top and front of the head. The parietal lobes, up and behind our ears here. The temporal lobes, which are the rounded parts underneath the frontal and parietal lobes. These lie behind the temples and in front of the ears on each side. And the occipital lobe, which is at the back of the brain. Another important area is the limbic system, which lies deep inside the brain in the frontal and temporal lobes. The brain can also be divided into two parts. The left side, which controls language and is more responsible for analytical thinking, and the right side, which controls spatial relations and attention and is responsible for thinking as a whole. Over time, Alzheimer's disease affects many areas of the brain. It isn't a specific event in the way that a stroke, for example, may suddenly affect one area of the brain, or the way other forms of dementia may initially affect the frontal lobe. Alzheimer's disease affects each person individually because of the person's personality, personal history, and life experiences. As the disease unfolds, however, it follows a specific pattern for most people. In other words, changes in a person's behavior can be an indication of damage to certain areas of the brain. Let's take a look now at the main areas of concern in Alzheimer's disease. The limbic system is involved with memory and emotion. It links the lobes of the brain, enabling them to connect behavior with memories. It also controls emotion and daily functions such as sleeping and eating. The limbic system is affected early on in Alzheimer's disease.
A common example of what can happen when the limbic system is involved is that the person may not be able to find an object, having forgotten where it was put, or he or she may immediately assume it's been stolen.
And someone takes my glasses, and I don't understand.
The person may become very emotional and blame others for taking it.
What's wrong? I can't find my glasses. Somebody's taking my glasses. Okay. Listen, we're going to take a look and we'll find them. It's okay. Okay?
A helpful way to diffuse these events is to not argue with the person.
Well, I'll look over here.
Rather, suggest a plan to retrieve or replace the missing object.
Mom, look. Thank you.
The temporal lobes contain the major memory center of the brain called the hippocampus, also part of the limbic system, where verbal and visual memory are processed. Verbal memories are words, memories related to what we read or say or hear. Visual memory is the memory we use to recognize objects, faces, and places to guide us around our environment.
The temporal lobes also control new learning and short-term memory. We know the temporal lobes are affected when the individual begins to experience lapses in short-term memory. That is to say, something that happened 5 minutes ago is quickly forgotten. There's no ability to retain memories of the recent past, and the person lives in the present moment. What is seen now is reality. For example, if you've been for a visit and left, the person who is beyond the early stage of the disease will have no memory of your visit to them. You were never there because you're not there now. The person will no longer be able to connect time and place to the present reality. The person may lose vocabulary skills and have difficulty understanding what words mean. He or she may go out to a familiar place and then not know how he or she got there or how to get home again. Damage to the temporal occipital part on both sides of the brain may also cause agnosia, that is, not recognizing familiar faces, objects, or places. For the person with Alzheimer's disease, losing the connection to familiar faces must be terrifying. And for caregivers, this can be one of the most heartbreaking symptoms of the disease. The moment when their loved one no longer knows who they are. A useful tip to help the person deal with agnosia is to have photos of special people prominently displayed with their names clearly shown. This can be used to help the person reminisce about special times with people who are important to them. The condition also applies to objects. The person may no longer recognize a familiar object or its purpose. For example, not understanding what a hairbrush is for.
The parietal lobes help us put activities in a sequence, such as putting clothes on in the right order. It affects the person's ability to use tools or perform tasks that require a logical sequence, such as starting and driving a car. Loss of these abilities is called apraxia. The parietal lobes also control our ability to understand spatial information, such as where we are in a specific environment and where other objects or places are. This area of the brain allows us to put this information together in a way that gives us a three-dimensional sense of our world. One of the most important requirements in our daily life, of course, is communication, which depends on an ability to manage structure and patterns in oral and written language. While the left temporal lobe is important for storing the meaning of words, the left parietal lobe is needed for us to use the words correctly.
When the left side of the parietal lobe is affected, symptoms you might see would be getting your words mixed up, using words incorrectly, not understanding what others say, using more generalities rather than specifics in your speech, and being unable to write clearly. Another example is mental arithmetic, which requires numbers to be used in a sequence. So when the left parietal area is affected, you may find that you're unable to handle money, bank accounts, or bill paying. If the right parietal lobe is not working, you'll start to notice symptoms such as getting lost easily and having difficulty figuring out how to put on clothing.
The frontal lobe is the area of the brain where we initiate activities, plan and organize our actions. This is the area that allows us to look ahead in time in order to schedule tasks and devise ways to achieve our goals. It's also our initiator. It's what switches us on and allows us to get going on an activity or plan. For example, if the person appears apathetic, to have no interest, or to quickly lose interest in an activity, often what is needed is a bit of help initiating the task. Otherwise, the person appears content to sit all day and not respond to people or activities. This lack of initiative, of not being able to switch on, shows up in many daily activities and can be a frequent source of frustration and embarrassment for the person and the family. It can also contribute to the person withdrawing socially and giving up hobbies or other interests. The opposite behavior can also be present. Instead of not being able to start an activity, the person may be unable to stop and may continue repeating the action over and over again. The orbital basal surface of the frontal lobes is the part of the brain that regulates our social judgment and behavior. It's the part that allows us to have insight into our actions so that we know what we're doing is appropriate to the situation. And when this area is affected, we no longer have this insight or the ability to control our social actions. We become disinhibited. That is, the normal social control that stops us, for example, from taking food from someone else's plate, may no longer be working. When the orbital basal surface is affected, you may also see symptoms such as the person shoplifting or being sexually inappropriate. The person may also have difficulty interpreting the feelings of other people or responses to their own actions. This becomes especially difficult for caregivers when the person thinks they've performed an activity correctly and the caregiver is the one with the problem. This happens because the person's ability to monitor their own behavior is impaired. The person may also become easily distracted, suddenly leave an activity, and wander away.
Frank, where are you going?
The occipital lobe controls vision, the ability to see and combine colors, shapes, angles, and movement into meaningful patterns. If the main visual cortical area is damaged on the left side, for example, the person loses peripheral vision on the right side. Although the occipital lobe is not usually directly involved by Alzheimer's disease, the surrounding visual areas that allow us to put the elements of vision together can be affected, and this then leads to unusual perceptual difficulties, such as loss of depth vision or inability to see movement. While it's not possible to restore function to brain cells damaged by Alzheimer's disease, there are treatments as well as strategies that can help both the person with the disease and the caregiver. These strategies can reduce caregiver stress and allow the person with the disease to live to his or her full potential. For the benefit of both the person and the caregiver, it's important to encourage the person to be involved in activities that are meaningful to them. Understanding and maximizing the strengths that remain will benefit both the person and the caregiver. And adjusting caregivers' expectations can reduce anxiety for everyone.
Okay, so once again, the link is there for you. So if you want to rewatch the video or, like I mentioned before, watch module 1, 2, or 3 of the Alzheimer's Journey, then please visit this link and you'll be able to watch them there. At the end of this presentation, there's about 4 or 5 slides which summarize the various parts of the brain, what they're responsible for, what symptoms you would see if that part of the brain was diseased, as well as some tips for the person living with dementia and care partners. So we'll reference those towards the end of the presentation. So we're going to talk about adapting to change, and I'm just going to read you a little story here based on the violinist Isaac Perlman. So Isaac Perlman is a world-renowned musician who had polio as a child and now walks with crutches. It has been told that at a 1995 performance at the Lincoln Center in New York City, just as he finished the first few bars in his recital, one of the strings on his violin broke. To everyone's amazement, and without fixing the string, Perlman closed his eyes and continued to play, changing and recomposing the piece as he went. At the end of his performance, the audience rose to their feet to show their gratitude for his persistence, and after brushing the sweat from his brow, Perlman said to the audience, "You know, sometimes it is the artist's task to find out how much music he can still make with what he has left." Jim Agnew, a man living with dementia, has used this story as a metaphor for his own life. He said that even though he faced many challenges in his life as a result of his diagnosis of dementia, he still could make beautiful music. Although life was certainly changing, he and others like him could continue to live meaningful lives. Although the music continues, the melody changes as persons with dementia learn how to adjust to living with the illness, as well as care partners learning to adjust with the changes that the person living with dementia is experiencing. So that's, I think, a really nice story, kind of puts things into perspective in terms of how we adapt to changes. So moving on to a little bit of self-reflection. So think of a time that you had something you wanted to do and then realized that you didn't have the tools you needed for the job, such as hemming a skirt and your sewing machine did not work, or hanging a picture and you couldn't find the hammer. So did you leave the task, or did you make a change and proceed? What did you change to make it work, and what was the result? So like changing the plan with any task, the changes due to dementia require that we find new ways of doing things, both for the person living with dementia, but more so for the care partner. We know that the person living with dementia cannot compensate for their losses, and therefore we have to make those changes and those adaptations. The key is finding an adaptation that fits with the abilities and the strengths of the person living with dementia. Really important to remember too that the strategies that we use, what works one day may not always work the next. So important to have a lot of tools in your toolbox in terms of how we adapt to these changes. Some people find it helpful to utilize worksheets such as this one here on the screen, and working through challenges by writing things down and sort of following a process. So just to give you an example here, what change is challenging for you? So we're using the example of baking or cooking. So my spouse can no longer follow a simple recipe. So they used to love to bake and have done it most of their life, but now they're becoming increasingly frustrating that they can no longer enjoy this activity because they're not able to follow simple instructions. Perhaps the disease is progressing such that, sequencing is becoming impaired. And I'm also becoming frustrated because, this is an activity that has been enjoyed by my spouse for many, many years, and it's frustrating to see that they're not able to accomplish this task successfully. So what am I already doing to adapt? Well, perhaps I've been setting out all the ingredients needed, as well as the measuring spoons and the cups. So anything needed to complete this task, I've been setting it out for them. How well does this work for you? Well, clearly at this point, it's not working very well because they're still not able to complete the task successfully. They're becoming frustrated and becoming more and more disinterested in something that they've always liked to do. And of course, we want to continue to encourage those activities that bring them enjoyment. So why do you think this works or doesn't work for you? So perhaps the activity isn't broken down into simple enough steps for where my loved one is now. It may have been okay a month ago or even a week ago to just leave things set out for them, but now because the disease has progressed, sequencing, planning, and organizing is becoming more difficult. They're not able to navigate the task with the way that I've laid things out. So what new ideas do you have on how to adapt? So perhaps I'm going to set things up in order that they are to be done. So perhaps from left to right, or only have out what is needed for each step. Perhaps I'm going to label things now. Perhaps I'm going to label the measuring cups and the spoons and the ingredients. Perhaps it's a recognition change or recognition. They're no longer able to recognize what items are, so they need that cueing by the verbal or by the written tag on the measuring cup, spoon, or ingredients. I may want to break instructions down into simpler steps. So I may want to have one instruction per cue card so that the information is not overwhelming. And again, using very simple, clear language. I may have to provide cues or guidance if needed. So I may need to be present during this activity now and provide that guidance and that direction, that step-by-step direction. I may have to demonstrate and show the steps. So I may do the action myself and then say to them, okay, now you try. So have them model the actions. And are there other people who could help you with the challenge? So perhaps this baking task has been something that your loved one has been engaged with and enjoyed, so you've been able to do something else during that time. But now that you're having to provide that guidance and that presence during the task, those other things that are on your plate are sort of becoming neglected. So can you reach out to family or friends or perhaps a volunteer in-home program that could come in and assist to complete this task and be present so that you can still attend to those other things that are on your plate? So are there other people that could help you with this challenge? Or perhaps, it may be tapping into a social rec program that focuses on cooking and baking so they can still participate in this activity that they enjoy, but they're in a different environment with volunteers and support people that are there to help as well, providing you with that respite as a care partner. So we're going to end this module with talking about maximizing brain health. So this brochure here, I have linked it for you on the Alzheimer's Society of Canada webpage. So it's Taking Action on Brain Health. What will you do to make it happen? So it offers some suggestions in terms of challenging your brain. So very important to keep our mind active and engaged. Things like, even learning a new language or learning how to play an instrument or just even doing a task differently. So maybe brushing your hair with your non-dominant hand, just keeping those neurons firing by challenging your brain. Playing different kind of games, so chess or Sudoku or crossword puzzles. A lot of people do some interactive brain games on the computer. I knew a gentleman who was living with early onset Alzheimer's, and he decided to take some courses online courses that were not relevant at all to what he had done for his employment or his schooling. So challenging his brain, despite having a diagnosis, still kind of making those neurons and those connections fire. Being socially active, so social connectedness is really important. We know that social isolation can be very detrimental for persons living with dementia as well as for care partners. So that social engagement is very, very important. So whether that's, trying to continue to participate in activities that you have always done, maybe it's, looking to volunteer. Even I worked with many volunteers who were in the early stages of dementia. They were still driving, they were able to deliver Meals on Wheels, or we had them involved in our day program or supporting us in the office. So, whatever interests are present for that individual, whether they're current interests or past interests, really important to keep those at the forefront and keep that social engagement. Joining an exercise group, that taps into both physical and social. Maybe it's joining a book club. Maybe it's, learning, joining a walking group. So again, a social and a physical. We talk about choosing a healthy lifestyle. So not only are we talking about, maintaining a healthy weight, maintaining a healthy diet, keeping your cholesterol in check, your blood pressure in check, making sure your diabetes is well controlled, reducing your vascular risk factors. All of those things are important, but also, making sure that we continue to include exercise, and that can be as simple as walking 30 minutes a day at 10-minute intervals. So 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes at lunch, and 10 minutes in the evening. You don't need to spend hours in the gym to maintain your physical health. And protecting your head, that's key. So any activities that you continue to do that involve the importance of wearing a helmet, so whether that's bike riding, rollerblading, skating, playing hockey, perhaps some of you out there still like to skateboard. Any activity that involves the importance of wearing a helmet, very important to protect your head. Protecting against concussion by avoiding falls. And of course, we can't predict if and when we're going to have a fall, but certainly making sure that our environment is safe to reduce the risk factor of a fall from occurring. And then, of course, wearing a seatbelt when driving, very important. Anything we can do to protect our head is key. It's very, very important in maintaining our overall brain health. So in terms of next steps, Module 3, we're going to focus on planning ahead. We will be inviting a lawyer to come and present for that module. They will discuss advanced care planning, talking about powers of attorney, substitute decision makers, and the importance of having a will. The next few slides are the ones I referenced following the video. So again, different parts of the brain, what you may experience when that part of the brain is damaged, ideas for managing those changes as a result of the disease, and then some tips of care for care partners. So frontal lobe, we look at the temporal lobes, we look at the parietal lobes, the occipital lobe, as well as the limbic system. And so essentially these slides summarize what was discussed in the video. There are some additional resources here. So these are links to the Bias for Us guides, which are guides that have been developed and written by people with dementia for people with dementia. So the two I've linked here are the tips and strategies and the guide to managing triggers. There are several others on this website as well. I think there's a few that are directed towards care partners, but several for persons living with dementia. So I invite you to check these out. They've got some really good tips and strategies and some good information on multiple topics. Just a reminder of our contact information. So you can reach us by phone by calling 519-680-2404. You can visit us at www.alzheimerlondon.ca. And again, please reach out to your social worker if you have any questions following this module or questions in general. They're here to support you. So I thank you for watching and take good care.